Hey everybody, this is John for MTG Nexus coming at you with another MTG Quick Hits. This one of the Pioneer variety. As a friendly reminder, if you like Pioneer and modern content, especially with a little bit of Legacy, please consider subscribing to the channel as we can be the most informative channel for those formats on YouTube. So, Quick Hits is a series very similar to the old SCG Daily Deck Techs when they used to do a deck tech and a actual match playthrough, kind of the decks that are kind of important or pique my interest in the format. This is a deck that many people should be familiar with in some variants, either from Standard, Historic, or Pioneer. This is Jeskai Lukka, kind of the king of the mid-range control decks. Uses Lukka, Copper Coat Outcast to cheat Agents of Treacheries into play, and then uses a Urion, which is the companion we'll get to in a second, to kind of blink it, steal a bunch of your permanents, and go from there. Toward that end, you are a Fires of Invention deck, so you're trying to get advantage with mana, and then the rest of the deck is either keeping you alive or setting up to get to that point. As far as important cards in the early game, Birth of Meletus, Chain of the Rocks, Omen of the Sea, and Anger of the Gods, all pretty good against the aggressive decks. A lot of the earlier iterations, Anger of the Gods was definitely Clarion, which can also be an important card depending on the mana situations that you find yourselves in. I guess Anger of the Gods exiles creatures, which can be relevant against some of the decks in the format. Omen of the Sea helps to smooth out your draws. Omen of the Sun helps to give you creatures to Lukka into. You also have Castle Ardenvale to make creatures for you to Lukka into. A couple copies of Gideon Ally Zendikar, very much the same thing. Gideon is also pretty good against other control and mid-range decks, pumping out about a stream of threats that they have to deal with. Narset and Teferi Time Raveler, the gruesome twosome that dominated Standard and Historic before the banning of Teferi. Obviously, Teferi makes it more difficult for your opponent to play at instant speed, actually impossible if it resolves. And then Narset, Harder Avails, is pretty good against a lot of things. Also makes your opponent's Uros a lot worse as they don't cantrip. A newer addition to this deck is Nahiri the Harbinger. This is another way to get Agent of Treachery into play with the ultimate. One copy of Supreme Verdict here to go through 3 Angers of the Gods. 4 copies of Elspeth Conquers Death answers a lot of problematic permanents that decks like this can have. Lukka, obviously very powerful engine with Agent of Treachery, and then Shark Typhoon is an alternative win con / a way to instant speed threaten things like Teferi Time Raveler. Interesting things with the mana base: 8 copies of Triumphs, a lot of cycling lands, 3 copies of Castle Ardenvale. Obviously this deck is very much in on making tokens to either close out games or to stay alive or have tokens available for Lukka. Sideboard, obviously you are a Yorion deck, hence why you're playing 80 cards, but beyond that you have the 4th copy of Chain of the Rocks for any type of aggressive decks, 3 copies of Ether Gust for any type of red or green deck, pretty good against the Team of Reclamation decks, pretty good against the red aggressive decks and the green aggressive decks, 3 copies of Mystical Dispute. Ether Gust also has pretty decent spots against Niv. 3 copies of Mystical Dispute when you're playing against Spirits and other control decks, 2 copies of Dovin's Veto and you need to play a little bit of an instant speed game, 2nd copy of Supreme Verdict to bring your total number of sweepers up to 5, and 3 copies of Dream Trawler. I'm pretty sure you bring this in mostly against aggressive decks when your Agents of Treachery aren't necessarily the best thing to be stealing your opponent's 1/1s. So that said, let's get into a match and see how this deck does. Back for a match with Jeskai Urion Fires. It seems reasonable enough. You're on the draw, which kind of sucks, but, you know. Your match would be very unfortunate, although it looks like we're up against Spirits. Which I suspect is not a good matchup for us. I'm going to play Birth of Meletus here. Plan on playing Omen of the Sea if they tap low for mana here. Don't know that we actually want either one of these cards. Could want both. Problem is, like, how many counter spells we're gonna have to fight through. Keep the Lukka, ditch the Narset. See if they go ahead and censor this. Feels like we're just up against normal blue-white control. So we have Mystical Disputes, Dovin's Vetoes, and Dream Trawlers, I guess, or Mystical Disputes, Dovin's Vetoes, Board Outer Sweepers. What an interesting format. Alright. This turn was kind of Jam the Fire's turn. So... pretty decent chance they have a counterspell here, right? I think we'll just go ahead and Verdict. It's a 1-for-1, but it gets their pressure off the board, and our wall isn't doing much here anyway, so... Do you have another one? Oh, just an opt. Blue-white control. How many counter spells have these decks been playing? Pioneer, Azorius Control, a lot. Play that. Then we'll play Fires. At least play around Censor. Force them to use a more premium counterspell. should have grabbed a land that wasn't these plains here, but feels like we're getting absorbed. Sure. So their hand is all gas. Yeah. Do you have a Dovin's V2? If not, this is resolving. Yep. Good old pleasures of playing Azorius Control with a tap-out control deck. Next turn we'll try to resolve Narset, and if that doesn't resolve, we'll probably concede the game. Just from a sanity standpoint. Alright, moving on. Like, we could try to fight through this, but it's just not the style of game we want to be playing. Board out the Angers, board out the Verdict. They have a little bit of threats in the form of Brazen Borrower. Okay, that's the list they're most likely variably on. Disputes, bring the vetoes. I can afford to board out the Chain of the Rocks. I guess we leave in a verdict, the verdicts, because they're the ones most likely to be able to answer what our opponent's doing. Just isn't going to cut it. Sounds better, I guess. Put back the verdict. So the problem, like, with this matchup is we are very much a tap-out control deck, and unlike something like, say, the Cavalier versions that were running around standard that could just jam threat after threat after threat, and at some point something was likely to stick. Our opponent already has a rather large counterspell advantage in the main deck, The weakness of the Azorius control decks in the format is the fact that their removal is terrible. Or I should say their spot removal is terrible. But, their counterspell suite is quite good between Censor, Absorb, Dovin's Veto, Neutralize, and then the sideboard these decks are packing like more copies of Mystical Dispute and things, so. But they are more of a dig through time, non-tap out deck, whereas we're very much reliant upon resolving our spells and just kind of out battle cruiser magicking our opponent. Really, in control decks, you don't want to be the deck to make the first move. But, you know, we're kind of bluffing here a little bit. Generally, the deck that blinks first and control mirrors loses. But the nature of the decks is obviously completely different. I'm going to play Narset here. They can't censor it, so this will force them to have a Dovin's Veto or a more powerful counterspell. Yeah. And if we're lucky, they'll like jam a like 3-mana Planeswalker here, like a Teferi or something, and then we can ECD it. Yep. Likely thinking that a Mystical Dispute will stop whatever our play is, but fortunately we have a white spell instead of a blue spell, so they do get some value off of it, though. Probably Teferi. Oh, ECD, my ECD. Sure. Could play Lukka here, but we're not going to get much value off of Lukka, so hopefully they don't have a second Elspeth Conquers Death. Controller. Uh. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 mana total. Unfortunately, we know one of the verdicts is on the bottom of our deck, so It's like one of the risks of the line we took. Not sure why you use the sensor there like that. Feels like a dig for time. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine. Okay. Sure. Okay. Sure. Afraid trying to play Battle Cruiser Magic with the Battle Cruiser Magic deck doesn't end particularly well there, friend. Still think Supreme Verdicts are the right call, especially against Dream Trawlers. Been able to get back Yuri that turn too. This hand isn't exciting, but I still think we keep it. With an opt, sure. Supreme Verdict, not exactly optimal, but sometimes you draw your answers in situations you don't particularly want to. Pass here. Sure. All right. Again, want to make sure we're hitting our land drops. Definitely don't want either of these. Looks like they're going to miss the first land drop, which is nice. Once again, we have no reason to take any game actions here. We're hitting our land drops. We have Shark Typhoon to cycle. Sure. Six, seven. Sure. Had to know that was the bait spell, right? So this beats a pretty good draw there. Don't even think we play Fire as we mentioned at this point. We have too much of our own instant speed game going on right now. Okay. What do you bounce? One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, 8, 9. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yep, we get to steal their Teferi and kind of go from there. So, nice to get the win against the long, grindy matchup. So, you know, this is one of those decks that I'm loath to play against other, like, counter spell control decks, but you do have tools to beat them. And, you know, ECD's taxing effect on that too can be really, really good in some spots. And, you know, this is one of those decks that it's got the tools to beat the control decks, it's got the tools to go over the top of the mid-range decks, and it has the tools to beat the aggro decks. So, you know, this is one of those decks that can certainly be a player in the format. So, something to be aware of as you're playing your Pioneer tournaments in the coming weeks. This has been John for MTG Nexus.